In this video, we're going to begin talking more about economics. What exactly is economics? Economics is a social science. And what that means is, with economics, we evaluate human behavior in order to formulate patterns. We then take these patterns and formulate laws. So, whenever we start talking about these economic laws are based off of human patterns. One of these laws that we'll discuss later on in the class is a law of demand. Law of demand states that as prices increase, people are going to buy less of that product. Well, that kind of makes sense. Whenever the price of something goes up, you don't have as much money to spend on it, so you just don't buy as much. So, that is one of our laws in economics, is the law of demand. And we developed that based off of human patterns. And we call it a social science because it is based off of these human patterns. And it's not quite the same as a science such as biology or chemistry, where they look at naturally occurring events or events that occur time and time again, and then it becomes a law that way. In economics or in these social sciences, a pattern that occurs time and time again will eventually become a law. But the patterns don't always hold true because not everyone acts exactly the same. Economics is also about the allocation of scarce resources. So all resources are scarce, are relatively scarce in some way, such as land. There's only so much amount of land on the earth, as well as water. There's only so much water, and there's actually almost only so much air. And there's only so much clean air nowadays. So how are we going to allocate that land to where it needs to go? Are we going to give it to the highest bidder? Are we going to give it to the person who can be the most productive on it? Are we going to say this much needs to go into corn and this much needs to go into cotton in order to efficiently allocate exactly how much is being produced? How are we going to allocate these scarce resources? And whenever it says all resources are relatively scarce, it means that all resources on this earth are scarce in some way, shape, or form, such as air. Air used to not be considered a scarce resource. There was clean air everywhere. Just like land used to not be considered a scarce resource because there used to be land everywhere. Free land that you can just plow up and do whatever you want with it. Nowadays, both of those are scarce resources, especially land. Air is becoming more and more of a scarce resource. Whenever you start thinking about pollution control, what we're trying to do is we're trying to charge people to be able to reduce the emissions to still maintain clean air. That charge is evident of the fact that our clean air is a scarce resource and is beginning to be depleted. So, all resources are scarce, so now we need a system in order to allocate those scarce resources. There are three main foundations of economics. And these economics rest on these three foundations, that is scarcity, choice, and self-interest. Without scarcity, we'd have everything that we could ever want in this world. We'd have more than enough. If we'd be in a utopia, everybody would be happy. There'd be an abundance of food, there'd be abundance of fresh air, abundance of land, and everybody would have everything that they want. But that's really not the case. There is scarcity. You can only have so much money, you can only have so much land, you can only be able to buy so much food. So because of this scarcity, now we need to make a choice. Are we going to go into a store if we have $10? Or if we have $10 in our wallet, are we going to go to a store and then buy lunch meat, sandwich stuff such as lunch meat, bread, cheese, mayonnaise, and be able to make sandwiches for a week? Or are we going to take that $10 and go down to McDonald's and buy 1.5 meals and be able to eat for a day and a half? So now we need, because of the scarcity, because we only have a finite amount of resources, in this case money, we need to make a choice. Well, that choice is based off of your self-interest. Is it more in your self-interest to go to McDonald's? Or is it more in your self-interest to go to a local grocery store and buy all the lunch meat stuff? So because of scarcity, we now have to make choices. We make choices based off of our self-interest and what we want. So that leads into the next thing. And that's the fact that every economic system must answer 5 basic questions. The 5 basic questions are what to produce, how to produce, how much to produce, when to produce, and for whom to produce. So every economic system, regardless of where you're at, must answer these 5 questions. If you're a farmer and you're thinking about it and you say, well, what am I going to produce this year? Well, you stop and you have to make a decision. Or what were the prices the best at last year? What is my land truly good for? Is it going to be good for growing corn and cotton, or would it be better for growing something like watermelons or sunflowers? Now you also must decide how you're going to produce it. Are you going to produce all organic? Are you going to produce traditional agriculture? Are you using fertilizer? Are you using all pesticides? Are you going to be using GMO crop? How are you going to produce it? You must decide that. And often prices help dictate that in the United States. How much are you going to produce? Are you the type of farmer, if you could produce corn and cotton, are you going to produce half corn, half cotton? Produce 75% corn, 25% cotton? How much are you going to produce? You must also decide when you're going to produce it. In agriculture, it's pretty simple. You pretty much plant during planting season, harvest during harvest season. But in other industries, it's not quite the same. A lot of industries, such as the toy industry, might be producing a lot more right before Christmas because that's when everybody's going to be buying it. And every economic system must also decide for whom are we going to produce the items. Who's going to be able to get them? Is it going to be distributed evenly? Is it going to be set up on a price system where everybody has to buy it? So these 5 questions must be answered in every economic system, regardless of where you're at. So then we're going to talk about 2 economic systems. Both of them are at complete opposite ends of the spectrum. So we have the price system right here. Complete and total freedom. And you're only limited by your financial resources. Whereas you have, on the other end of the spectrum, you have the command system. Command system is where everything is allocated, everything is already distributed, everybody is told what to do. So, how do you get to make decisions in the price system? The price system is based off of, naturally, prices. Everything goes through markets. Whenever you're trying to answer these 5 questions in the price system, you say, what are you going to produce? Well, what is the highest price? How are you going to produce it? Well, what's the lowest cost? How much are you going to produce? Well, does the market allow me to produce a whole lot? And then when are you going to produce? Well, when are you going to produce is often in the agriculture is dictated on the time of the year, but in other industries you're going to produce whenever you're making the most money. So all of these are dictated by prices. And then for the whom are we going to produce? Or for whom to produce to? That one is answered by how much can you buy? And it's also answered by prices. So it's all based off of prices. So individual choices are based off of financial decisions. So for example, the question I posed earlier is you go into a retail store and you've got $10, or you can go to McDonald's and you have $10. Where are you going to go? And how you're actually going to buy, what you're going to buy is going to be based off of that financial situation of you only have $10 to spend. So what are you going to do? This is also known as a free market. It's free because it's free of all interference of government entities, anything like that. It's purely on one end of the spectrum where everything is based off of prices, and all the prices are developed through a market. Then on the other side, you've got the command system. The command system is where all the prices are developed by, not prices, but all of the decisions are made by a central administrative unit. Everything is decided by a government or a ruler. There is absolutely no freedom of choice. So whenever you go to answer these 5 basic questions under the command system, the first question is, what are you going to produce? Well, the government comes in and says, Farmer A, you're producing corn. Farmer B, you're producing cotton. And then Farmer C, you're producing grapes. And everything is decided for them on what they are going to produce. They say, well, how are you going to produce it? Well, the government steps in, because government entity, central administrative unit, steps in and says, well, you're going to produce everything using this much fertilizer, this much pesticides. You're going to use these type of seeds, and you're going to run this type of irrigation system on it. And how to produce is all developed by the government or by the central administrative unit. How much they're going to produce? Well, under a command system, somebody like a king or a dictator is going to walk in and say, you need to produce 1,000 bushels of corn. And that's how much Farmer A is going to produce. Farmer B, you're going to produce 10 bales of cotton, and that is exactly how much you're going to produce. You can't produce more or less. So that's dictated under the command system. When to produce, that's also dictated under the command system. Or under the command system, a central administrative unit comes in and says you are planting on this day and you are harvesting on this day. Regardless of what you think is best, that is what you are doing. All the decisions are made for whom to produce. They all come in and say, well, we are going to distribute all of the wheat that's produced in this country evenly. Straight up, even Steven, everybody gets their fair share. So all 5 of these under the command system is answered by a central administrative unit. There is absolutely no freedom of choice. So what are the pros of the price system? Well, the first one and the main one is freedom of choice. You get to decide all of these questions. And it's very efficient at allocating most resources. Any and all resources that have a market to them, they're very efficient at allocating that. Stuff like corn, cotton, all of your commodities that have a market, and just about anything that has a price on it is very efficient at allocating these resources. But what's the bad downside of the price system? It's not equal in the for whom question. And what I mean by that is not everybody has the same family budget, so not everybody can buy the same amount of stuff. So it's not very equal in distributing who gets what. This was where the term the rich get richer and the poor get poorer come in. Because the rich can go out and buy as much as they want, or the rich can go out and get different items that help make them richer, where the poor, they cannot buy these high-end things that would allow them to move up in social status, so they wind up staying poor, and they actually get poorer. That's where the price system kind of comes in, helps the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. And it's definitely not very efficient at allocating public goods. Public goods are goods that are free to the public or they're put on by the government for the public. This includes public schools, the military, fire department, police department, anything of that nature. Things also such as Medicare, welfare, anything like that. It's not very efficient at allocating military stuff like military and police support and fire department. So if we were in a pure price system here in the United States, for you to be able to get any kind of military protection, you would have to pay for it. And you could only, and yes, we do pay for it through taxes, but you could only get as much as you could afford. So let's say we pay, a low-income family pays only $1,000 in taxes. Well, they would only have $1,000 worth of military protection. Versus somebody who's a multi-billionaire who might pay $100,000 in taxes or something of that nature, they would receive $100,000 in military support. So wouldn't be very equal. We're all in the same country. We also need the same national protection, but it wouldn't be equal at all as to who got the protection. Another scenario is if we did it that way, if it was under pure price system, allocating police department. So if we were in a pure price system and we were allocating the police system, and somebody could only afford, say, $10 worth of protection a month, and somebody else could afford $200 worth of protection, and the person who received the $10 or was paying only $10 a month, and they say they got robbed clean, the police department may only come in there and say, well, you can only afford 5 minutes of investigation work, so we're only going to spend 5 minutes of investigation work on this case. And that's not very efficient or it's not allocated very efficiently in that manner. Under the command system, though, a pro is it is very efficient at allocating these public goods. So under the command system, we can allocate the police department, the military, everything very efficiently, all these public goods very efficiently. But the downside is you get a major loss of freedom. You don't get near as much freedom of choice. You don't get to decide what you're going to buy. Everything is just given to you. In the United States, we operate under primarily a price system. For almost everything, we have the price system. But whenever it comes to the public goods, we start dealing more in the command system. So in the United States, we have a primarily price system with a somewhat mixed system where we do utilize the command system for things such as the public goods, such as parks, military, fire department, police officers, education, and things of that nature.